Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 4. There is a lot to talk about and a lot to criticize this episode, unfortunately. But we start out with some good. There's the funeral scene, of course, which is sad, but Jon gives a fabulous speech, shows a lot of leadership, so that's great. We have a couple of nice moments as far as Dany saying some unheard words into Jorah's ear and Sansa giving her wolf pin to Theon, and a few nice moments like that. So that scene was probably one of the better ones in this episode, to be honest with you. Then we move into a celebratory scene, and that scene starts out kind of somber because they're still sort of in mourning mode, but as people drink more, it gets happier as we go. And there's an interesting political move that takes place here in that Dany asserts her political power and makes Gendry the Lord of Storm's End.
A fitting reward for a hero. And a Lord of Storm's End who will be forever loyal to you.
See? You're not the only one who's clever.
Well, Sansa and Tyrion see the political move that's happening there. I'm not sure that Jon sees it, but she's showing everyone that, hey, she's the queen. She can assert this type of authority. But even though Dany is trying to go for the power play, it's in very short order. We see Tormund come up, and he's got the big group of guys there, and he's talking Jon up and saying how he's so kingly and all of this stuff. And it's very, very apparent that Jon has the love of the people. So while they may recognize Dany as the queen, Jon absolutely has the love of the people. And you can tell that she is absolutely concerned about his claim to the throne. She knows that if they find out who he really is, they will back her and not him. That is unquestionable. And that comes into play in a short while. We'll hit on that in a minute. So we have that, but back to the celebration, we also have this little drinking game that takes place with Tyrion, Jaime, Brienne, and Pod. Kind of a fun little game in the moment until Tyrion sort of crosses a line and brings up Brienne's virginity. And of course, that causes her to get up from the table rather abruptly. Tormund comes in right at that time. The poor guy, he seems to come in at the wrong time all the time. So Brienne kind of brushes off his advancements yet again, and she walks out, and then Jaime follows her, and we get back with them in a short time as well. Also at the party, we have kind of a good little exchange. One of the other moments that I really enjoyed in this episode was the exchange between Sansa and Sandor Clegane. She sits down with him and they talk a little bit about Ramsay.
And he got what he deserved. I gave it to him.
Oh.
Hounds.
And so there's a nice little funny moment there for the two of them. But he also makes mention that had she left King's Landing with him, then she wouldn't have had experienced any of it. Not Jaime, Littlefinger, Ramsay, none of it. And he's right about that, of course, but she grabs his hand and then she says that
without Littlefinger and Ramsay and the rest, I would have stayed a little bird all my life.
And in the midst of all this, we also have Gendry running off after he becomes Lord of Storm's End. He runs off and proposes to Arya. And as I'm watching this, I'm saying, no, Gendry, no, don't do it. I knew Arya was going to refuse. That's not who she is. She handled the refusal well. She gave him a nice kiss. She told him, hey, I'm not a lady. I've always told you I'm not a lady. And so that was done very well. So that was another piece of it that made me happy. Then we hit back onto Jaime and Brienne, and they end up in the bedroom, and it's a very awkward love scene, and that's good. It should be awkward between them. I thought both of the actors played it off very well, and I liked how it went down until they had Jaime's character do a complete regression and leave back for King's Landing. I didn't really need to see Jaime and Brienne consummate their relationship, but I doubly didn't need to see it if he was going to turn stupid and go back down to, I don't know, I guess be with Cersei. It's one thing if he's going down to try to kill Cersei. It's another thing if he's going back to Cersei. He's got this awesome character arc that's leading him to the good, and we're all, at least I'm happy that it's going in that direction. And now they're just making his character regress, and I don't know what they're doing there, but I didn't like the way that went. And not only that, too, let me point out that Jaime left after he found out that Cersei hired a hitman to kill him. So what, he's going to go run back to her now? This doesn't affect him. The fact that she's hired a hitman to go after him somehow doesn't have any emotional effect on him. Like, I don't know. I just wasn't buying that. And speaking of the hitman and that whole thing, I usually like Bronn as a character. And we all know that Bronn is self-interested. He has been self-interested from moment one. He has been about money and riches and all of that stuff. But up to this point, he's done it in a very sort of charming, charismatic way. This scene with the three of them was just Bronn being an asshole. It was not the character that we've kind of come to like, in my opinion. This was very out of character for him, just the way he behaved in that scene. So that didn't work for me at all. So then we have this other exchange with Jon and Dany. It starts out good. She talks about how much she loves him. They end up a little kissy face. That's great. Until Jon stops it. Oh, so annoying. Then they have this conversation about Jon not telling anyone about who he actually is. Dany pretty much begs him not to tell anyone because she understands who Sansa is right now. Jon doesn't actually understand who Sansa is. Dany actually does. And Dany is right in what she's asking Jon. At the same time, Jon is right in wanting to tell his sisters who he actually is. How can he keep that from his family? So neither one are necessarily wrong in this position, but where it does go wrong, in my opinion, is
we can live together.
We can. I've just told you how.
that to me seals her fate right there. Her demand for him not to tell his sisters, yeah, she's in my opinion, sealing her own fate there because that wasn't a good move. It makes her, at least to the viewer, I think, it makes her a little bit less likable. Which is good because I'm rooting for Jon, actually. I'm rooting for Jon all the way. But nonetheless, we knew he was going to tell his sisters, and he does. He ends up telling his sisters, but that happens in a little while. We end up first back at the war room, and I am so aggravated about the whole war room battle plan thing, starting from episode 2, which I thought, by the way, episode 2 was the best episode this season, except for the battle plan scene. The battle plans were absolutely ridiculous, and we executed on the absolutely ridiculous battle plans with the trenches behind the army and the cavalry charging straight forward and all of that in episode 3, which was all aggravating to me. But then they added the aggravating ice on the cake in this episode by having another scene in the war room where they tell us that somehow half the Unsullied lived, half the Dothraki lived, half of the northern people lived. Like, come on, please. Just don't. This is so terrible. What they showed us in episode 3, there is no way that half of all of these forces lived. The Dothraki, we saw all the lights go out. Like, that's just so poor on their part for me. I think that that's so poor. But so we have this scene in the war room, and outside of the ridiculousness of that, we have Sansa come out with a very reasonable request to give the battle-weary soldiers some time to rest and recuperate before going into the next battle, which Sansa tends to be right about battle strategy. She was right before the Battle of the Bastards. She told Jon that they didn't have enough. I wish people would listen to Sansa more when it comes to this stuff. So Dany, of course, wants to assert her authority. She doesn't want to wait. Jon, of course, has to show that he's on Dany's side because he has to convince her that she is his queen. He's not going to go after the throne and all of that. So he says, no, the Northern Lords will definitely go. This, of course, results in a little scene with Jon, Sansa, and Arya and Bran, who might as well not be there, out in the Godswood because they need to have a little chit-chat here. During this, he ends up telling Bran to tell them who he actually is. He swears them to secrecy first, but we all know that Sansa's not going to keep this secret, or at least I did watching this. I knew Sansa wouldn't. I figured Arya would, but I knew Sansa wouldn't. She wants to protect Winterfell, and if Jon is the rightful heir to the throne, there is no way Sansa's keeping that quiet. And he is the rightful heir to the throne, so... And her telling Tyrion, which happens a short while after, is definitely a political move. Sansa knows that if she tells Tyrion, it's going to go from Tyrion to Varys, and then once it goes there, as Varys said, it's no longer a secret, it's now information. So it's going to spread. There's no way that's not going to spread. And as has already been mentioned, the people are going to back Jon, not Dany. So we know that's going to happen. In other good scenes, before we get too far, we had a scene with Sandor and Arya where they're going on their way to King's Landing. Some good dialogue there. Both talk about never expecting to come back, though, which is a bit disconcerting. I hope that they make it back. I fear that they won't. I do believe both characters are probably going to die before the end. I'm really rooting for Arya because I love her so much, but I feel like she's probably not going to make it back either. Or if she survives down there, I feel like she's going to kind of be one of these ride off into the sunset characters. And honestly, I'll call it now. I would not be surprised if Jon also lives and ends up being kind of a ride off into the sunset character. He sent Tormund and Ghost back up north, or Tormund decided to go back up north, but he sent Ghost to go back with him without saying goodbye to Ghost. Another little irksome thing for me. Like, not even a little pet for Ghost. Come on. The wolf lost half an ear. He's all beaten up and everything. You're not even going to say goodbye? Like, oh. I'm too much of an animal lover for that, but I would not be surprised if in the end of all this, Jon ends up north with Ghost kind of on his own or with the wildlings or something like that. Would not be surprised if that's the way it goes. And if Arya ends up sort of riding off into the sunset, maybe doing that thing that has been mentioned a couple of times over the course of the season, or the seasons rather.
Where will you go?
Essos is east and Westeros is west. But what's west of Westeros?
I don't know.
Nobody does. It's where all the maps stop.
The edge of the world, maybe.
I'd like to see that.
I wouldn't be surprised if Arya lives, maybe to see her go in that direction. In other goodbyes on Jon, though, we have him not petting Ghost. He gives a good goodbye to Tormund, and also kind of what seems to be a very final goodbye to Sam and Gilly, which was slightly worrisome to me. It's like, what are you trying to tell us, show? Are you telling us that Jon's going to die? Or is this goodbye more that Sam is going to head back home because he is now the head of his household? So is he going to head back home now? I mean, what's he got to stay in Winterfell for? He's not going to be up at Castle Black anymore. There's no Night's Watch. So I'd like to think of that section as that goodbye being more about the fact that Sam's going to go back home with Gilly and raise his family there. And speaking of, we find out in this scene that Gilly is pregnant, and they're going to name the baby after Jon if it's a boy. So that was nice. Jon's response saying,
I hope it's a girl.
It's kind of funny. Then we get a time warp. Somehow all the ships and the dragons are all the way down at Dragonstone pretty much already, and we end up with Euron attacking them, and magically, we end up with the first 3 arrows are direct hits to Rhaegal, and he falls and he ends up in the ocean. And then we have like 47 other arrows aimed at Dany on Drogon as she's flying towards them, and every single one of them miss. So yeah, that's realistic. Again, the battle stuff kills me. If I were Dany and I were on the dragon and I saw Rhaegal go down, the first thing I would have done was go, oh shit, and move that dragon around and get around behind the fleet. Oh, you have those big arrows on the front of those ships? Yeah, I'm going right behind you and I'm burning your butts from the back. But no, she lets them all try to hit her. She doesn't go after them during the period of reload either. She just sort of flees. And of course, they start hitting all the ships and all of that stuff. Tyrion does the smart thing. He figures out pretty quickly that probably the worst place to be is on one of those ships. So he ends up in the water, which was smart. I like little smart moments for Tyrion to show that he is actually clever. So that was good. We have some conversations between Tyrion and Varys this episode, some interesting conversations. These were good conversations, actually, and they both kept true to their character, which made me happy considering we had some veering off on characters this episode. But they end up at one point kind of talking about treason. because Varys is now feeling like Jon is probably the right person. And unfortunately, Dany seems to be confirming that at almost every turn, because she, I fear, is going to try to burn King's Landing to the ground. I actually think, and I'm going to call this now, another thing that I'm going to call a little bit ahead of time, I think that it's very possible that we may end up with no King's Landing and no throne when we're all done. I think that between the two women, between Dany and Cersei, I think that they are probably going to burn King's Landing to the ground. Between Cersei with the dragon fire underneath King's Landing and Dany with her dragons and the armies and all of that stuff, I really wonder if there's going to be any King's Landing left at the end of this, if there's going to be any throne left at the end of this. I think both women might end up dying. Jon might go right off into the sunset, and Sansa is going to end up being the Queen of the Realm, is where I'm going with it. But that's just my little theory in the midst of this review. We'll see. But so we have all of that happen, and then we have this completely ridiculous meeting between Dany and her advisors and a very small handful of troops in front of the castle walls, with Cersei up there, and of course she has Missandei, and she's got the mountain and all her people and all this. And for some reason, somehow, some way, the showrunners want us to believe that Cersei, who is the most murderous woman in Westeros, she's not going to take out Dany, Tyrion, and Varys and that little handful of soldiers in this moment. Like, what, you're going to say that she was out of range? They were out of range of the arrows? Well, you have the Dragonfire arrows there. Like, there's just no way. And they have the Gold Company. Like, there is no way on God's green earth that Cersei would have let them live through this at all, period, the end. So this entire scene to me was completely and utterly ridiculous. I was so upset with this scene, and I even tried to rewatch this episode to see if I'd feel any better about it. Nope, I was actually feeling worse the second time around when I saw it, because it's just completely ridiculous. But anyway, we end up with the beheading of Missandei, and the goal is served. We wanted to, or the show wanted to, make sure that Dany was pissed off enough to act very, very rashly and very violently, which is what we need her to do to get Varys to betray her and to end up essentially having King's Landing blown off the planet before the end of this mess. At least that's my theory. So, yeah. So that's pretty much how we end up. Missandei is gone. Rhaegal is gone. So we had a couple of deaths this time too, but we had a lot of things that I hope that next episode they go a little bit more with realism and they don't give us ridiculous situations like that meeting that, oh, there's so much Hollywood plot armor that we can have this meeting that's totally unrealistic and Cersei's not going to take them out. Like, I can't have another one of those over the next 2 episodes, because this just made me so unhappy. But Game of Thrones is still one of my favorite shows on the planet. It is not just one of my favorite, it is my favorite show. I just feel like they made a lot of mistakes in this episode, and I feel like the showrunners did a better job when they had less money and they had to focus more on the story and the character element and not just trying to make the sensational battles and things happen, which is where I feel like the showrunners are now. I feel like they're sacrificing a lot of realism and a lot of everything that has been built up for these characters. I feel like there's a lot of sacrifice there and not loving it. So I have high hopes for the next 2 episodes. I'm hoping that they do a better job. I fully expect we're going to end up with a lot of death and a lot of battle in the next episode. And I suppose the last episode will be picking up the pieces. So I don't know how they're going to fit it all into 2 episodes and make it satisfactory, because this episode and even the last episode, there were a lot of things I could criticize, and it's not feeling as satisfactory as I would like it to feel. So, but that's just me. I would be very interested to know what anyone listening thinks. Do you guys agree with me or not? Did you think this episode was amazing? Do you think that my criticisms are off base, or are you on board with me? So let me know in the comments below, and thanks so much for spending the time with me today. Hope to see you all back again next time. Bye now.